I am wearing my white pumps for this occasion, which is a fabulous reference to the film we're going to be talking about today. I am John McDonald, American playwright, podcast co host, and many other American things. Go baseball, hot dogs, and apple pie. Hello, Magnus.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Magnus Alexander, British writer, author extraordinaire, and general knave.
Ooh, that's fun. Being a general knave is very useful for today's podcast because we're talking about one of my favorite films, not from 1995, but from 1996, a year down the road from the other movies we've talked about so far. And this is going to be The First Wives Club. And I kept seeing Instagram posts about stills from The First Wives Club, and my birthday is next week. So by the time you hear this live, it will be past my birthday, but I like to celebrate things I like. I have seen First Wives Club many times, so if I leave something out, I'll feel bad about it later. But this is the kind of thing where I've seen it so much that not only can I quote it, I could probably just watch it in my head if I wanted to. And it's a great movie, really great quotes, great soundtrack. Everyone was really excited to work on this film in '96, and so I'm excited to talk about it and remind people about it and its wonderful legacy because it has a really great legacy in pop culture too.
And on the opposite end of the scale, I have heard of this movie. I have never seen it. I have never seen the trailer. So I'm approaching it from the opposite end that you are, John. So I would say that in this overall, this will be a good chance for me to find out a bit more of the movie, and also to delve a bit into your thoughts of why it's such a great classic. Because I've seen the phrase "cult classic" bandied around for this movie,
Oh,
so
it totally is, yeah.
I intend to find out and challenge you, sir, on why it
Okay.
deserves such a lofty title.
Oh, the first thing I
So,
would tell you about the First Wives Club is
mm,
that there's a certain segment of the gay population aged 35 plus, my age, about, that can quote this movie because it came out in that weird space where we had just started aging out of Power Rangers, but we weren't quite on teen dramas yet. And so mostly a lot of us, not me, I saw this on an HBO free weekend the first time halfway through the movie. So I didn't actually see the start of the movie for a long time. Uh, but yeah, most of this is if you had a single mom and you were a gay kid, or if you had a mom that was like going through like her midlife crisis. This was very much your mom had you watch this, and then you unironically fell in love with it yourself sort of film. And this was '96, so this is 3 years after Hocus Pocus, where Sarah Jessica Parker and Bette Midler had previously worked together.
mm,
And this was years after Diane Keaton had worked with the girl who plays her daughter in the movie, whose name I always forget. Um, who is Where is she on the IMDb page? I pulled up the IMDb page. So Jennifer Dundas, who plays the lesbian Chris in this movie, who's really great character, had previously played Diane Keaton's daughter in another movie that I've never seen called Mrs. Sorrel, it looks like. So there's a lot of legacy to this film, both going before it and coming after. So yeah.
mm. You've dropped a couple of big names already. Diane Keaton, Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker. From my brief foray into looking up some details of this movie before our conversation today, it does seem like it was quite a power list of established actors that got involved in this.
It's
Um,
also the first film for Timothy Olyphant. He plays a director in kind of a cameo appearance, the same way Heather Locklear
mm,
does. But this
mm.
is the first time we see Timothy Olyphant on the big screen, and he's super young. And I actually didn't know it was Timothy Olyphant until I was researching for this episode. So even I'm learning things today.
Isn't life though one big learning experience?
Oh, that's true. That's why I couldn't do Drag Race because my references would be like not of the '80s, and so RuPaul would get so mad at me.
Looking into the people that were in this, the one that really struck me Just to quickly name drop the other major actress, Goldie Hawn. Wonderful woman. But the one that really struck me was Maggie Smith being in this movie.
And she's so
Um,
good in this movie as Gunilla Garson Goldberg, who's not just a first wife, she's a second wife, a third wife, a fourth wife, and a fifth wife, made wealthy by her former husband's deaths. Like, she's the upper aristocratic class of. This is like not even her doing the Downton Abbey thing. This is her legitimately just being at the top of the New York social ladder. Maggie Smith is fabulous in this movie. In the 2.5 scenes she's in, she completely captivates. There's a scene with her and Sarah Jessica Parker having lunch, and Sarah Jessica Parker is playing the best weird socialite climber bimbo airhead ever, and Maggie Smith is just judging her with her Maggie eyes, and even if she hadn't spoke, you would have gotten the whole scene and everything. It's just an amazing lunch scene.
yeah. You're making this movie sound like it's Campus Christmas, sir. Can you
Well,
claim such a title?
it's I think so it has some camp moments. It's definitely a comedy. I don't know that this is surreal enough to be camp. I think it's
Hmm.
certainly pop culture. The background I chose for our podcast today is the Lichtenstein portrait that takes place in the movie, and so Lichtenstein is part of it. Pop art is part of it. Dionne Warwick has the opening song on the soundtrack. The Oh, what is the name of the song? Dionne Warwick sings the first song that opens the movie, "Wives and Lovers," which
Hmm.
is about how to please your man. It's a very old school song. This has the same kind of soundtrack vibe as My Best Friend's Wedding, where it's very pop, but it's very accessible to a lot of people. Yeah, so it's not camp, but it really is of the 90s. It's a very pop moment. It almost has more of
Hmm.
a Nancy Meyers feel, where you kind of get those lush spaces that are made for the people in the film.
Hmm.
Also, there's an apartment where there's a fountain in, because Sarah Jessica Parker thinks that's the height of class, is to have a working fountain in her living room,
Hmm.
which is kind of camp and kind of amazing at the same time. It's just like this three-tiered outdoor fountain in her penthouse suite that she's
Uh,
sharing with her sugar daddy, essentially. So
Ooh, sugar daddy. um, a fountain living room sounds very Simish, I have to say.
I
But
yeah, that sounds like Sarah Jessica Parker's character for sure.
so was this before Sex and the City? I forget when Sex and the City was.
I think it was. So here's something interesting, and I'm going to talk
Hmm.
about this, and you're just going to have to bear with me for a minute.
Hmm.
So, in the book that
Hmm.
this is based on from 1992, so basically the book has an unreleased manuscript that's picked up in 91, and then the book is released in 92. And the book itself is not a comedy. The book itself is overtly queer. There's a jewel thief subplot that doesn't exist in the film.
Oh,
Um, yeah,
interesting.
it's a whole thing. And so Sarah Jessica Parker's character that she plays in the movie in the book is very much like Sarah Jessica Parker's character from Sex and the City, only she doesn't know how to access the power that Sarah Jessica Parker has in Sex and the City. So there's a weird timeline where this book comes out. Sarah Jessica Parker gets cast in this movie to play that character, Shelley. And then Sex and the City with Candace Bushnell happens and it takes off. And like somehow Sarah Jessica Parker went from playing like cute girl in a high school in the TV show she was in, to playing like Shelley, to playing her Sex and the City character. So it's not long after, but I feel like Sex and the City is like a 99 thing. Like I feel like it's very
Hmm.
turn into the new century kind of thing.
Hmm. The thing, the thing is, what strikes me, having looked at some of the fashion from the First Wives Club, it seems to be very much like it really captures the women of that era, um, like smart suits, very boisterous women by the looks of it. It almost gives me nanny vibes in some aspects. Not the over the top outfits that Fran was wearing,
Yeah.
but the general vibiness, if that makes sense. Would you say that's the case?
I would say that's the case, and I think because the leads and everyone that worked on this movie wanted to work with them too. Like
Mm,
I know that when I was looking at the Wikipedia page, it was like this revitalized the career of the three leads, and I'm like, Bette Midler didn't need that help. Diane Keaton was doing fine, and Goldie Hawn had no problem. Like Goldie Hawn, after Laugh-In was so successful, she started her own
mm,
production company, so she'd have roles that were outside. So when you look at like Overboard and movies that Goldie Hawn did that were fabulous, like Private Benjamin, those are all her movies that she helped
mm,
produce. So Goldie Hawn has always been very smart. Diane Keaton in like Annie Hall was setting standards for fashion, and Bette Midler, as a rock and roll icon, had already been doing so. Like everything in this movie is done with purpose, and everything is done on point.
mm,
And a lot of people think about the fashion of the ending scene with the women in the matching white liberation pantsuit dress combos with the big kicky white
mm,
pumps. Um, but there's other great fashions. Goldie Hawn in leather pants as Elise in the gay bar is a really great scene.
mm.
The whole gay bar scene is just a really great scene because it's probably one of the only lesbian bars that actually look like a lesbian bar in pop culture TV. Shout out to Bomb. Um, yeah, even Stockard Channing's scene in the beginning, after they get through the preview of going back to college and showing how they all met, and that first scene with Stockard Channing showing her. I don't want to spoil this, so I'm trying to figure out how to say it's not spoiling it, but she has this kind of haggard, not wasted, but just very much like the world has used me kind of look, and it's that very much like
Mm,
Mame with the bathrobe going off the shoulder. I'm very angry, but I have nowhere to put it kind of vibe. And so like the spaces and the fashion really work for both the time period, but also the film.
mm,
The great scene with Sarah Jessica Parker being like, Dan Hedaya, unzip me in a way to like seduce him is it's
mm,
also an amazing scene with Sarah Jessica Parker. She just threw herself. This is her doing that same thing she did in Hocus Pocus, where she just kind of
mm,
threw herself into the role. And you
mm,
could see why she got cast in Sex in the City because of it, because she just threw herself right
mm,
there into Shelley, and it's fabulous.
mm. And dare I say that once she was in Sex and the City, it really overshadowed a lot of her other work. When you think Sarah Jessica Parker, you automatically think Sex
Yeah.
and the City. So to a degree, like her success has also, dare I say, typecast her somewhat. But she seems to have been doing very well anyway in life. So
Yeah, and
that's
she's
not
done some other
necessarily.
stuff. If you've ever seen Failure to Launch, it's a really
Mm,
interesting movie and concept.
mm.
She did Mars Attacks. She was in Mars Attacks, which is one of the best cult camp
Oh.
movies ever. So she is in Mars Attacks. So she does camp. She was in Ed Wood, which I don't think
Mm.
anybody saw her in. I don't think anybody remembers that. But like,
Oh,
she's also got Hocus Pocus to her credit, which is
well,
something
true.
that's really
Very
important.
true.
She was in Flight of the Navigator, the longest Disney movie ever, and I'm including all the marbles. I don't know if you've ever seen Flight of the Navigator, but it is a
No.
90-minute movie that feels like it's 4 hours.
Yeah,
It's
almost,
it's long,
almost like a plane journey. Oh,
almost like a plane journey, except it's a science fiction movie, and it's a lot. Um,
oh dear.
yeah.
Sounds like a
So
bit of fantasy.
in any case, Sarah Jessica Parker is one of those actresses that had a really great career, and if she hadn't had Sex and the City, she would have been fine. But she had Sex and the City, and she married Matthew Broderick, so I can't be mad at her. You know.
No, no, no. Oh no. At the end of the day, if anything, one should be jealous, which, but in a totally understandable way.
Yeah.
But moving on from that, you mentioned before about the appearance of a gay lesbian bar within the
Yes.
movie. So the 90s were really a period when you start to see depictions of queer people coming out, um, being in the media and such. It wasn't always handled tactfully. I could probably put together a whole list of offensive stereotypes. Um, but some stuff was handled well. So, how would you say the depictions were in this movie?
So what's interesting is that almost all of the scenes with with Chris and them, who is the lesbian daughter of Diane Keaton's mother Annie.
Mm.
Almost all of the scenes with her, except for the really great one with her really great line where she's like, "I'm a lesbian, a big one." They're all in the trailer. So a lot of what you see of queer culture in the film is in the trailer. And even though the trailer
Mm,
features scenes and dialogue that was changed from the film itself,
mm,
um, yeah, Chris is an excellent side character because she doesn't pull focus, but she has a very rich kind of inner life that you get glimpses of. Um, and I think as far as gay bars, this is probably one of the best. Like, so when I've watched Matt Baum, he's talked about the gay bar in Married with Children. He's talked about the gay bar in Maud.
mm,
He's talked about there wasn't a gay bar in the Golden Girls, but there was that scene where Blanche thinks she's in a gay bar because her brother Clayton is there.
mm,
But so on a scale of like gay bars in pop culture, I think that this was purposely made as one of the best, one of the most authentic, and one of the most liberating. Because really, this movie
mm,
is a movie about finding liberation in a different phase of your life.
mm,
Because the movie is really about changes and phases of life, which is why it so resonates with the middle-aged mom
mm.
cast. Yeah.
Then subversively, it sounds almost like it could resonate with other people that are also going through changes and such. Um,
Oh
from what
yeah.
you're
They
saying,
they leaned into the queerness of this like heavily. Like I don't know if I can stress how much that in 96, like in 92 with the mutants in X-Men, I don't think I can stress how both this was of its time, but also still shocking. It's a very weird place where there was acceptance. The AIDS crisis was a thing, but it wasn't as much. We had
mm,
more HIV medications at this point. And of course, I was young then, so I can't actually speak to that because I didn't experience
mm,
that. But in my mind,
yes,
that's how I think about it. But yeah, so it's a weird headspace where there's acceptance and Will and Grace is on its way. So there's the ability to
yes,
really do camp and the ability to really both poke fun at gay culture with love, but also advance gay culture. It's a
mm,
very weird kind of space to be in where it's like it's both gratuitous and it's trying to score points, but it's also acknowledging something in society. It's a very weird space, and I feel like even the flirting scene that the character who kind of looks like Rosie O'Donnell has with
mm,
Goldie Hawn in the gay bar, that is done really well, authentically. It works in the story. You find out quite a bit about Elise in that it's about Elise's desire to be seen and loved, and it's not done as a joke. It's not like an ew moment like the kiss in
mm,
Supernatural between Bobby and Crowley, where it's done for like laughs and it's like an ew thing.
mm.
Like there's like a Chris is interrupted on this date at a gay bar she's having by her mom, and her mom is like at a gay bar. If you watch the trailer, it's almost verbatim for what happens in the movie, but it's the idea of, "Mom, you're in a gay bar," and she's like, "Yes, and I'm here to support you, sweetie." And it's just like the best cringiest middle-aged mom moment ever because like I'm just my mom wouldn't have done that, I don't think, but like I'm just imagining like being at a gay bar and then your mom shows up in the middle of like not your date, but like you're having a drink with the girl you're obviously
Yeah.
kind of interested in, kind of thing. It's a great scene. Yeah, and I don't remember if Chris is even a I think Chris is a character in the book. She does the same function in the book, but Diane Keaton as Annie has a completely different trajectory in
Okay.
a way than the one in the film. But in the film, it really works. Chris is a really great character. She's very strong-willed. She does not want her mother and father to get back together. She
Mm,
actually wants Annie to stand on her own. So in that way, it's a really great character that is rooting for her mom's happiness, as
mm.
opposed to being the divorced kid character in a college that is like, my parents can still get back together. She's
Mm.
all in for the plot to destroy her father's life. Like she's like 190% in. My dad is a scumbag. Yes, please, let's destroy him.
Destroy the patriarchy.
It's
Down with
more like
that.
destroy my father. The patriarchy is bad, but my father is worse. So let's start there and work our way up. Is kind of her thinking, I think.
It almost sounds like it's leading into this the theme from the 90s of how society, or at least the media, was starting to show um, young women and young girls as more liberated and independently minded persons. To go back to a previous example with the nanny, you had Fran helping Maggie to find her own 2 feet, and it sounds like in this film that the daughter doesn't necessarily need that because she's already a quite independently minded woman. So in a sense, it's like the flip of that. She wants her mother to find her independence, not
Yeah.
need the reliance on a man, even someone that was her husband for quite some time. That's an interesting contrast.
It's also a really interesting dynamic because Annie's mom is also there. So there's three generations, and you have this
Hmm.
interesting scene in the kitchen, in the end of the second act when when everything is splintering apart and like
Hmm.
all of the emotions are happening. And Eileen Heckart plays Catherine, who is Annie's mom, and then Chris is Annie's daughter. And
Hmm.
there's a scene where the mom and the daughter, even though they have very different views on how Annie should live her life, are there to comfort her. It has a lot of those vibes of Sabrina's conversation with the women in her life right
Hmm.
before her wedding. It has that kind of like not quite coven vibe, but a very much like this is about women coming together once the men have kind of used us up, but we still have inner power kind of thing. There's a lot of that in
The,
this movie.
the bonds of the sisterhood,
Yeah,
so
it's
to
very
speak.
practical magic, divine secrets of the Yaya sisterhood. It's very that, but in
Hmm.
a very different way, and it has a very different legacy than either of those movies. But it's very
Hmm.
that. It's very much in that genre of sisters are doing it for themselves, which is why they have the rhythmic song in the soundtrack, which is the first time I'd heard the Eurythmics outside of Christmas music. So it's sort of
Hmm.
a lifelong love affair.
Interesting. And just thinking back to another point you made before, you mentioned about Will and Grace. If memory serves correctly, um, as you said, that back then it was seen as somewhat subversive, but also loud and proud to start featuring gay people without them having like horrible lives
Yeah,
or things are going wrong in their lives. Will and Grace, by the looks of it, it came out in 1998, so two
yeah.
years after this. On it, quite quickly afterwards came Queer as Folk US, which was in 2000. So you were starting to see some real different representation and people, and more than anything else, LGBT people that were well, for the most part, happy in their lives. Of course, like queer as folk had to show them all having drama
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form. But to show them having success and actually having domestic lives was quite an important thing. So it's interesting to hear this movie um, represented that as well, in some sense.
It also represented otherness in people like so Bronson Pinchot, who I would say this movie kickstarted his career in another way. So Bronson Pinchot plays this kind of straight interior designer who's really bad at his job, and he plays Brenda's kind of new boss after Morty, her husband, throws her out of the business she helped him build, which is kind of the Brenda plot besides Bette Midler's character wanting to become a healthier person. It's a health related subplot to do with food, and so if you haven't seen this movie and you have like eating disorder issues, it might be a little bit difficult to watch
Mm,
just because of that. But this was 96, and it's not as bad as I'm making it sound, but it's also just like very much of the time period it was. But Bronson
mm,
Pinchot plays Duarto Feliz, a straight interior designer who is very campy and could be read as queer.
mm,
We don't ever actually see him with a life partner, so it's possible Bronson was playing a queer character, but Bronson is also known for playing really flamboyant straight characters like Balky from Perfect Strangers,
mm,
who was this kind of eccentric European cousin that came to America to live with his cousin. And then Bronson also, I don't know how much theater he had done, but in 95, he did a Sondheim Review, which is also the first time I saw John Barrowman anywhere. So Bronson Pinchot, although we don't know if they're queer or not in this film,
mm,
plays this very eccentric but still very grounded character who agrees to do the plot because he loves Brenda in a lot of ways as for both her friend and her boss, and he wants
Mm,
her to find joy within herself. Like all the women have those characters around them that want that for them, and
mm.
their ex-husbands are all just, scum. Um, One of the ex-husbands goes on to play the dad on Seventh Heaven as well, um, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about as well. Also, Victor Garber, who played Jesus in Godspell, is one of the scum ex-husbands, and that's always kind of weird and interesting
Mm.
to think
Uh,
about.
Stephen Collins, that was the one that went on to
Yes.
play Seventh Heaven.
He plays
Which,
Aaron, who cheats on Annie with his therapist, played by Marcia Gay Harden with the cutest pixie haircut I've ever seen in a movie. Marcia Gay Harden's makeup and hair artist did so much good work in the she's in two scenes near the beginning of the film, and just the way she uncrosses her leg in that nice Fatal Instinct sort of way, that kind of metallic silver blue blouse she wears, and the haircut. Oh, it's great. She's not a lesbian, but it's everything you want from your strong femme character.
mm. Oh wow, I can see what you mean by contrast. That Stephen Collins, who you were speaking about before, in Seventh Heaven, he played a reverend, a Protestant minister, and it was done in 1996 as well. Talk about
Oh
direct
yeah. So
roles.
the ex-husbands serve a very particular device in this film, which
Mm,
is the same device they serve in the book in some ways. It's not to it's to show that they were coddled and they were supported. So they're not really necessarily scum at first. They don't start out
mm,
this way. This isn't a movie about abuse in
mm.
marriage. This is
Yeah.
about the idea of how people support each other, and as they move into different phases of their lives, how things can go wrong. So for Aaron being married to Annie, they had been going to therapy, and the whole thing was is he started seeking comfort of his therapist, and they go from being separated to fully divorced, and then she pulls the rug out from under him.
Mm,
And in the book she ends up going to Japan or something like that, and there's this really great subplot with her aesthetically finding joy in little things that you don't get from the movie. But the book again is not a comedy. If you're going into the book expecting the movie, don't expect that. Yeah, but Stephen Collins plays kind of a gross scumbag in this film, but it's for plot purposes. It's not like gratuitous scumbaggery. It's and at the end of the movie, when he's feeling the burn, he's like, I'm approaching 50. No one's gonna hire me. I can't start over. And Annie's like, yeah, sucks, right?
welcome to
She's
my world.
yeah, it's basically that. And then she throws back the phrase from her therapist's face, and she holds up her business card and she goes, Aaron, grow with love, or grow from love. And it's the exact phrase that Marcia Gay Harden said at the beginning of the movie. It was the title of her book or something. And it's just this amazing moment where he's tried to dominate her. He's tried to yell at her in this boardroom. He's just watched his advertising agency essentially bought out by her. And he
Mm,
starts shouting and pounding his fist. And she's like, nope, I'm not afraid of you anymore. It's this great moment for Annie, for how they
mm.
scaffolded her growth and her self-esteem to almost get back to who she'd been in college when she'd been an activist. Um, so
In,
good. It's so good.
Interesting. It sounds then like it's the accumulation from the film over the duration of it of her own self-empowerment to the point where she feels empowered now. She could stand on her own 2 feet, and he rails against the fact that everything's crashing around him, and almost as if she should help him for how because of how they were.
Oh yeah. And you
Yeah.
see this happening at the same time because this part of the film is a montage where each ex-husband is getting the same exact speech from their ex-wife in a different way. And this is the part of the movie where it really changes into kind of the finale where everything we've gone through has come together. And it's this really great montage of Dan Hedaya, Victor Garber, and Stephen Collins all kind of getting served in a different way. Like Dan Hedaya's in a meat locker with the mob. Victor Garber is being threatened with like a Barbara Walters interview, which in the 90s is like a really big deal. And Stephen Collins has just lost his business. And this is like all of the women have gone through these self changes, and now it's time to use the capital the men have built on the back of the women in order to make all women's lives better. This movie was not meant to be like Enough with Jennifer Lopez, or the movie where Holly Berry has to kill her ex-husband whose name I can never remember. This is not a movie about divorce coming out of abuse, which is a different genre. This is, a movie about divorce leading to empowerment in the next act of your life. And so like when you think of movies that come after this, like John Tucker Must Die or The Other Woman, they're trying to use the formula, but they don't really push it far enough.
No.
Yeah, I will say the First Wives Club TV show does, and I'm also glad that it's a POC focused cast, because there are no people of color really in First Wives Club. You've got Dionne Warwick and Billy Porter on the soundtrack, but First Wives Club, for all the reasons I love it in '96, is a very much like white New Yorker movie. I think really the only character that actually has a really super authentic time struggle in this film is probably Bette Midler as Brenda, because her husband has left her with virtually no cash. So like Annie and Elise, Goldie Hawn and Diane Keaton, are relatively cushioned even in their divorces. Brenda it's not just about the divorce, it's about how financially unstable and how she's having to do things to survive, like how she had legitimately helped Morty, her husband, build up this appliance business, and how she wasn't able to pay rent at this point in certain points in the movie. Like legitimately, she's one of the only characters in this movie that actually struggles with anything really realistic to divorced women. Not that I don't love Elise and Annie's journeys, but like if you're thinking about like real struggle, I mean, first of all, this really isn't really the movie for that. This really is the movie with Maggie Smith judging Sarah Jessica Parker over lunch. But like if you're looking for like the realness in this movie, it's really all about Bette Midler as Brenda. And her desire, to be loved, to be strong for her son, and her desire to kind of survive, and also missing Morty. She has a very complicated relationship with Morty too. And Dan Hedaya plays a guy going through midlife crisis perfectly. Like he knows when to play whipped with Sarah Jessica Parker. He knows when to play snarky against Brenda. You get it more in the movie. The trailer shows an extra scene of Brenda going like crazy at some kind of anniversary party, which I'm glad they cut from the film, because it does not help Brenda's character at all. And I have to say the trailer is very disappointing as opposed to the film itself. Yeah, but Dan Hedaya does a great job, and I'm probably saying his last name wrong, but Morty Cushman is a great kind of like not quite greasy side character, but a guy that really isn't comfortable growing into older age. And so part of Shelley, part of Sarah Jessica Parker is him trying to stay, young and powerful. When if you're married to Bette Midler, she's the most powerful person in that relationship. Let's be completely honest about it.
Yep. I have a comment to make about subversion, but I shall mention some quick reference. You were saying before about the fact there's no people of color within this movie. It reminds me of when I was watching The Witches of Eastwick with my other half.
There's no people, but that's
Yeah.
that's an important point, because that's part of the new waspiness England thing.
Yes, indeed. What struck me when we were watching Witches of Eastwick, they were doing a sort of town hall meeting outside, and like there was white chairs, white people in one massive square, and I said to him, "It's pretty white out there, isn't it?" And after that, he could not. He paused the movie every now and again when there was crowds of people, and he was making an effort to see if he could see any diversity. But it kind of shows the theme of the movie of the small town, small-mindedness element.
What if we ever
Just
talk about Witches of Eastwick?
Mhm,
That's actually a plot point in the book series because it's a series of
mhm.
books, and the Witches of
Yes.
Eastwick became the movie. I would argue that Dan Hedaya as the Italian American type of character and Uncle Carmine, who's kind of the mob character, they are
Mm,
the most POC people in this, but they're definitely, kind of that white passing. But it's not. It's one of the things in '96 where it was more about the fact that they were making this kind of almost revolutionary movie for women. And so they
mm,
probably weren't actually thinking about POC casting as much as we got Elizabeth Berkley, we got Bette Midler, we got Diane Keaton, we got Goldie Hawn. Um,
yes.
so it's one of those things where like I want to acknowledge it, but I also want to acknowledge the things that work in the movie. There is an Asian side character, which is the character that Chris is on a date with,
Mm,
who does have a very small speaking role. So there is a POC with a speaking role in the film,
mm.
um, but it is a very white film. And like, if you're gonna watch it, just realize, I don't want to give '96 a pass because I think in 1996 there were probably already the conversations. But the movie is doing
Yes.
so much work for women. I can't.
Mhm.
It's one of those things where like you have to say it, but you have to be like, and but, and you feel bad for the but the but is definitely there.
Yes. One can. This is the thing. We have to acknowledge something as a product of its time, and we can be honest about, where it was failing, and that should be talked about. Um, but dare I say, at the same time, again, we have to acknowledge it's a product of its time, and how that helps to inform us nowadays. Because certainly, it seems that they've made an effort with the new TV series, from what you're saying,
Yeah.
to address this. Um, so I haven't seen anything about the television series. I only found out about it when we were discussing about doing this podcast on the movie.
Yeah.
It's another example of me finding out about something that exists that I didn't know about before. And
Well,
I don't think
yeah.
I'm ever going to stop finding out about things that I don't know that don't exist.
Well,
Um,
and I haven't seen it because it's on a streaming service I don't have access to. Either is part of it is that when we get these things, especially in kind of our new world, if they
mm,
happen on a streaming service that I don't have at the time, like Peacock has been doing some great stuff for NBC that's supposed to be these new original series, but
mm,
I can't watch them. I one don't have the money. I two don't have the time. I would also like to retract my previous statements because Bette Midler and Dan Hedaya play Jewish characters. So,
all right.
it's not necessarily POC, but they do, it's not all like Protestant wasp whiteness, which is kind of the problem with Witches of Eastwick. But Witches of Eastwick is also about that because in the books, it's about revolution and things like that.
Mm,
The follow up Sons of Eastwick is all about republicanism.
mm.
And so it's a very interesting thing, but I just wanted to be like, I'm aware of how very white this movie is, but it's just one of those things where you have to go into this movie knowing that it has this kind of white, almost upper class vibe, but not quite, because class is a
Mm,
part of this film. Maggie Smith's character is the embodiment of class. The idea of Elizabeth Berkley's character, Phoebe, coming in from another place, coming into New York society, Sarah Jessica Parker trying to come into society expressly and
mm,
become someone of status and importance. The idea that Jennifer Dundas is in university but also has time to intern at her father's company without anyone batting an eye. Like so, there's levels of like class and power here,
yeah.
but it's not. There's references to Jackie Kennedy in the auction scene, which is a really great Maggie Smith scene in the movie. Actually, Maggie Smith and Sarah Jessica Parker. Um, just Maggie Smith leading Sarah Jessica Parker to the slaughter like a lamb. Oh, it brings me such joy to think about.
Uh, and on a side note, before I touch on my point of subversion, um, I love it when I see well-known faces, actors and actresses that I know about in different roles, interacting with people with each other, possibly starring together in something I've never seen them star together in. It, I don't know. It just strikes me as quite humorous sometimes. I'm not talking about a Marvel
Yeah.
level thing here because dare I say, the MCU will eventually cast every actor and actress it gets its hands on as heroes, villains, or side characters in its productions. It it's just going to keep going on and on. They'll eventually manage to get their hands on people that are playing DC heroes and start casting them as their own characters as well. It it's almost like a who's who at this
Yeah.
point. But yes, but more for me, I enjoy seeing well-known faces acting together in scenes. Yeah, there's just something about it that makes me smile. But anyway,
The First Wives
in
Club gives me the same feeling in that manner
terms-
that The Holiday does, which is one of my
mm,
favorite non-holiday movies. Cameron
uh,
Diaz, Jude Law, Jack Black, and Kate Winslet are exceptional in that
yes,
film. Another
brilliant.
case of not many people of color, but that's not really what the movie is about. And so that's another case of one that could have used more POC representation, but was a really great
Mm.
movie on its face. And it's one of my favorite non-holiday films. It's The
Mm.
Holiday. So yeah.
So the thing about subversion that I wanted to bring up, from everything that you've been saying, it sounds like one of the major underlying themes about this film is the subversion of the almost traditional viewpoint that people meet, they marry, they get together, and afterwards their lives are fine and perfect. Like, whatever troubles there are below the surface and never interfere. This movie, though, it subverts everything. It's about people actually they do change over their lives. They don't stay static. That they do get divorces and people have lives after that. Um, Other things that you've said, like the interior decorator who's not gay, but actually straight,
He
but
might be gay. It's
they
never
might be
really
gay, might be
discussed,
gay.
but it's
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, might be gay. The daughter who's an out and proud lesbian. Um, a subversion of the traditional good daughter role sort of thing. It just sounds like there's so much here that's going against um, what the view of family was in back in the day, but not in a bad way, but in a way that brings out realism in a sense.
This is very much a found family movie without it being about queer found family. This is found family in the same way the Golden Girls is about found family
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. There's a few really great scenes that I'll kind of pluck out to talk about the idea. So there is a very frank conversation about how they've supported their husbands. And if you watch the trailer, the scene where they're all putting their like uh, old wedding rings in like old wedding rings in champagne. That's that scene where they have a very frank discussion about the different ways they've supported their husbands in the past. They're now ex-husbands, and this is
Mhm.
after the floor has been ripped out from under each of them for various reasons. This is also a movie about kind of confronting your own demons. Goldie Hawn's character Elise has a really great subplot about alcoholism. Like it's a
Mm.
very real thing. She's very real in the need for it. There's a really great fight where Bette Midler does this great affectation of who Guns N' Roses, where she like pops the O in roses in this really great moment. And then they have the best line in the film, which is this line that I quote constantly, where Goldie Hawn as Lee says, "You think that because I'm a movie star, I don't have feelings? Well, you're wrong. I'm an actress. I have all of them." And then she's like spilling her martini in her hand. And it's the best. And I'm not going to lie, I have quoted that scene to so many people. And about half the time, I just get like a look. But some people go, First Wives Club. But no, there's this great scene with Elise where um, there's a breakdown because she can't get revenge the way the other two are getting. Victor Garber's character is really good at what he does, but
Mm.
he's a jerk. So he's not actually. It's a really interesting thing because Elise's journey, the idea of standing on her own 2 feet, the idea of transitioning from, going from wanting to play science fiction, share, babe cop, to actually doing a play where she plays someone of her own age. It's very much almost Betty Davis in All About Eve in a way. It's really hard to explain without you having seen the movie. But Elise's journey to self worth is not necessarily about Bill, but it
Mm,
is. A lot of it is about how she's medicated herself. A lot of it is about how she surrounded herself with herself. There's this really great pop art Andy Warhol like painting of her in her home. Um, she has to clean out the places that she shared with her husband, which is a
mm,
part of like giving him alimony, which she is very shocked by. And like so, they come into her apartment and it's just stuffed with everything Elise. Like there's this need in Elise to be needed, to be wanted, to be out there, to be seen. There's a provocative idea about how she's more sexually adventurous than the other two,
mm,
and that she always has been. And it comes to a place where it's really about her alcoholism, which is one of the only things from the book that stays in the movie.
mm,
And it's not always pretty. Elise is done as this very like pretty character, but not everything Elise goes through is pretty.
mm.
Um, and just like when she shows up to Brenda's apartment after their fight, and she's like, "I've never been to your apartment. It's so real." Like those are the first things out of her mouth. Like the idea of
Mm,
what is real to Elise and how much she has been
mm.
medicating, how much there's been this echo chamber, and how the other two women in her life pull it out of her and have her try something new that brings her such great success. And then
Mm.
Elizabeth Berkley, who wants to be her, is now following the same trajectory. It's a very brief glimpse of Elizabeth Berkley in the audience of the play that Elise does. But it's also like how Elise has potentially stopped Phoebe from going down the same path that she
Mm.
went down, and how there's like this way that she's potentially affected Phoebe's life. We never get that. There's never that confirmed in the script, but I always kind of took that
Mm.
um, in that she's stopped Phoebe from going down the same path without even knowing
Same, the
she is
same
actually.
spiral of self-destruction.
Yeah,
Mm.
because that's
No.
that's what Phoebe wants. Phoebe wants to be Elise, but as herself, and she just has no idea how to do that. Like she's not empty in the same way that Shelley is, but Phoebe is very young and doesn't know who she is,
Mm.
and she's really glommed onto the idea of Elise Elliott as the star and the provocation, and
Yes.
like just the reality that Elise may have personally changed her life without even knowing she'd done it. Um,
Mm.
it's really great. It's a good time for all.
Hmm. It sounds like there's quite a bit of hidden depth to this movie, despite it being, by the sounds of it, like a quite involving comedy
Oh
and
yeah,
such.
you can do a comedy with a lot of depth. Like when I think about the Birdcage, there's so many different ways to look at
Oh
the
yes.
Birdcage. But like First Wives Club has a lot going on in it. It's in a lot
Mm.
of ways, the reason that it grossed $181 million, mostly domestic, is because it was filling a void that didn't really exist. I mean, in '96,
Mm.
there weren't really a lot of divorced women having successful lives in pop culture.
Mm.
Like, you didn't see it much. It
No.
was very revolutionary to have done.
Mm.
Um,
I mean, even the Golden Girls, they were divorced, so their husbands had passed on or left. But the Golden Girls finished, I think, about 4 years before the movie came out. I think it was 1992. The women, the Golden Girls, in a sense, even though they were still working and such, they weren't necessarily pursuing success
yeah,
and such. The theme, the whole there for them, it was more the camaraderie. They're looking for um, relationships and companionships, etc. I totally get what you're saying. This was a totally different thing of women that were still seeking to find their own way, to in a sense to build their own way after coming through such hardship.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the IMDb, someone listing 15 best movies about divorce to quote unquote help you move on. And none of these movies are all that healthy for the women. Both versions of The Parent Trap have the woman returning to the man who decided they were going to split up their kids. Kramer versus Kramer, Mrs. Doubtfire, Waiting to Exhale. I'd even add Troop Beverly Hills to the list of movies about women whose lives improve from divorce. But in 95% of the movies, they go back to the man. Now, Brenda, and I'm going to spoil this, so you may want to like put your fingers in yours for 2 seconds if you want. But Brenda's kind of subplot is finding her way back to Morty, but Morty's subplot is also finding his way back to Brenda. So there's actually a very even thing of meeting in the middle somewhere, of changing
Mm,
who they were without knowing they were going to meet again. So it doesn't feel like True Beverly Hills, where Shelley Long and the guy from Coach get back together at the end, where it feels like it has to be that way. It doesn't feel like The
mm,
Parent Trap. It has a very different vibe to it. But every woman in this movie has kind of a different ending in a way, and they all feel both of their time and satisfactory. You don't
mm,
actually mind that Brenda and Morty get back together because it was obviously something that brought Brenda great pain. She actually still has very deep feelings for Morty throughout the film. Um,
mm.
and it's a really interesting, like, it's not wish fulfillment, but it kind of is. It's
Mm.
in that very kind of interesting headspace where life is a very complicated thing, and they're
Yeah,
showing that complication, and it works out really well for me, I think.
I do like the sound of that. It's not often shown. The fact is that people sometimes when you become comfortable in a relationship and um, things are going well, so to speak, but then perhaps things don't start to go well because you're so comfortable and you don't realize that you should have some self-reflection and change.
Yeah.
It almost sounds as if that these two people needed to go um, through a bit of hardship in order to be able to look at themselves and to realize like who they want, you know, what was unhealthy for them as individuals and what they need to change. But at the same time, come to the realization that actually I do still have feelings for someone and we can make it work, but we've got to be able to allow ourselves to grow in new ways and to acknowledge to each other that
It's
we've
also
changed.
it's also about age appropriateness of where you are in life. So in the way that Dorothy and Stan hover each other during the course of the Golden Girls, it's the same
Mm,
way that Brenda and Morty keep meeting in this movie in different phases of their changes. And
mm,
where it's played for laughs in the Golden Girls because Stan just won't give Dorothy up and they just keep crashing into each other. Here it's very much like Morty's not as much of a villain as Shelley is. Shelley is
mm,
really the catalyst for all the things that Morty does that really hurt Brenda, except for the one major thing, um, which is deciding to like have her leave the business that they built
mhm,
together. But that's also catalyst from Shelley is why that happened.
mm,
And so really, Morty Morty is a bad guy in some ways, but Morty's also not a bad guy. And what you see of Brenda and Morty's relationship is satisfying at the end of the movie when they're together, but they don't end the movie together. She still ends the movie with Elise and Andy as Brenda, having learned about herself. So it's not like she leaves the movie with Morty. It's more
no,
like she has Morty again, but she also has her independence. She has
mm,
her worth. Unfortunately, she's lost weight, and that's a big part of her subplot. But that's also something from the book. So that could also be a leftover from the book in a way,
mm,
because she's a much, I don't know how to say this other thing. She's a much heftier presence in the book. They make a lot more of a deal about her weight and about her
mm,
body structure in the book than they do in the film. So in a way, the film is better because it smooths out some of those things that are a little bit
mm.
like very 1992. But she also has
Yeah.
a lesbian subplot in the book she doesn't have in the movie. So you kind of have to decide
Okay.
what you want there. So
In
uh,
it does get interesting. It sounds like another example of a hangover from that period. You know,
oh yeah,
it almost sounds as if it was like the author's intention was, I'm going to discuss real problems for real women, but it sounds like it's sort of done in a way that wasn't totally
Yeah.
res- respectful, and like dealt with the needed nuance of that.
Well, in
But
the
you've got
early
to,
90s, it was still very in vogue to like diet and things in a way that people are now pushing like keto diets, which is just new fancy term for Atkins, quite honestly. Um, that was kind of the thing in the 90s of the idea of, thinness, the idea that somehow you want to sit around like Peggy Bundy, but you also want to be thin like Peggy Bundy, even though you want to sit around eating bonbons all day. It's a very much like kind of like a trap thing. And it
mm,
was a really easy way to show a lot about a woman's personality for how she approached food. The movie
mm,
She Devil did it with Roseanne. The TV show
this is
Roseanne did it with Roseanne. Uh, I don't know how else to do with
um,
that, but it's one of those things where it was
yes.
it was a very easy trope in the 90s, and we really didn't start addressing it. And it was
Mm,
just one of those things where that's a product of its time, that if you don't acknowledge it,
yes.
you just you kind of have to acknowledge it. It just is the way it is. And movies exist in a finite space. Even if they're remade, the original exists.
Dare I add another example to that? Um, how Miss Babcock was treated when she gained some weight in the nanny. Cool little fact: the reason um, for that in real life is the actress. I forget her name, but she was pregnant with her daughter, I believe, at the
Yeah.
time. So, but they made this whole plot about Miss Babcock overeating to compensate for not being able to get Maxwell as a thing. But I do think they were making a few, dare I say, fat jokes then at
Yeah.
her expense,
It's
which,
the 90s is not a
yeah,
great time for that kind of thing. I think the only
no.
character on TV that I ever saw that was overweight that never got a lot of guff for it was probably Lori Beth Denberg on All That, and then the character she played in Hanging with Mr. Cooper. I think Lori Beth
Mm,
Denberg is probably the only overweight character I've ever seen on TV or in film that didn't have a special episode about her weight or didn't have that. I mean, even Raven Simone in That's So Raven had an episode about her weight, which is slightly jarring, but also it's a really good episode, but it's also jarring in context.
mm,
First Wives Club, I'd also like to talk about because I don't want to forget. Um, the
mm.
music in First Wives Club is done by Mark Shaman, who is an
Ooh,
openly queer composer, lyricist, songwriter. In fact, after California Prop 8 passed, which banned gay marriage, which we had already had and then got rid of, he's actually one of the people that worked on Prop 8 the musical, which was a 3-minute sketch. And so he was kind of like the Rachel Bloom of his time, in that he was doing all the stuff in the 90s. And he'd worked with Bette Midler a lot. He did stuff in her discography like Big Business, which is where Bette Midler plays her own twin, along with Lily Tomlin playing their own twin. Not a well-paced movie, but if we talk about it, I'll talk about the pacing. Beaches, which is the movie that, besides The Rose, Bette Midler is known for really well. Uh, the music of Sister Act, which is why Sister Act has almost the same feel um, in music as this movie, Sleepless in
mm,
Seattle, Adam's Family, Values. At least I don't think he did Adam's Family. No, he did Adam's Family and Adam's Family Values, both Sister
wow.
Acts, City Slickers 2, um, George of the Jungle, Patch Adams. My favorite, I think he also did this that I saw. He also did my favorite Brendan Fraser movie after The Mummy, which is Lasting Something. The one where he played, Brendan Fraser played the guy stuck in stuck out of
What?
time because his parents put him in Blast from the Past. Blast from the Past with Alicia Silverstone. He did the music for that. George of the Jungle. He did the music for South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut too. So this has been. He even did movie. He did music for Mary Poppins Returns. Tick Tick Boom. He has a cameo appearance in it. Um,
It
yeah, so there's a
wow.
lot of
What
great. Oh, Down with
a
Love.
catalog of names.
He did Down with Love, which is great. So yeah,
What a catalog of names. Like that's impressive, honestly.
yeah.
Hmm.
I really wanted to talk about Mark Shaman. Oh, sorry. Hugh Wilson, who directed First Wives Club, was in Blast from the Past. That's what I had seen. I had gotten that wrong, and I apologize for that. But yeah, so the music in this has a really queer history because Mark Shaman is an openly queer composer. Is a large chunk of composers, if they're not openly queer, are definitely queer. Um, I'm trying to think. There is this is also a very New York movie.
Hmm.
This is definitely a love letter to New York in a time period. Kathy Lee Gifford is in this movie. Ed Koch and Gloria Steinem have appearances. Um, Ivana Trump has an appearance, but she plays
I
like yeah, she's in the trailer.
I
It's
was
a
trying
quote of the movie. It's yeah.
I was trying to find a good way to mention the fact that there'd been a Trump cameo, but
I mean, there
thankfully
was a
not.
Trump cameo in The Nanny too, because he was like
Oh,
a New York icon then, and we didn't know how bad it was going to be in the 90s. Some people probably had an inkling, but most of us in the other parts of America did not. But Ivana Trump has that great line of "Don't get mad, get everything," which is in the trailer and in the perfect spot in the movie as well. Um,
hmm. It almost in a way she actually encapsulates this movie perfectly.
oh God, Ivana
Being,
Trump is
yeah,
fabulous. I mean,
wasn't
she's
she his
fabulous in the
first
movie.
wife?
She was I don't maybe she was a wife of his, unfortunately
Yes.
for her. But
Mm,
yeah, she kind of encapsulates the don't get mad, get everything thing. And so there's also kind of a glib nod to the materialism of being the divorced wife who goes for getting everything. But there's also all of the people in the movie have been through some very harrowing emotional, physical things. And so
mm,
it's also about the idea of how one reclaims himself coming out of a toxic relationship, which Ivana has to deal with in a lot of ways.
yeah.
Um, and then the three main characters go off singing "You Don't Know Me" by Leslie Gore with great joy in one of the best finales in a movie I think I've ever seen.
Mm,
When people think of First Wives Club, they think of this ending scene and this dance, which is referenced earlier in the film as a tribute to their dear friend Cynthia. And it's a really great moment where the camera watches them do it and follows them. And it's almost like at that moment, Cynthia is watching them perform like they did at her birthday party when they were in their 20s. And it's like the new start to the next phase of things. They've gone through all this. Elise is no longer an alcoholic and is dating someone, and she's dating the director of her hot new play, I think it is. And there's Brenda and Morty that have found each other again, and Annie, who has told Aaron off in a myriad of ways and has a lovely lesbian daughter. And they get to do You Don't Own Me, which has themes from the 60s, which is kind of about they graduate from college in 69, so they have a very distinct worldview they go into about activism and women's rights and women's liberation. And then they have this happening essentially a little less than 30 years later. And it's, yeah.
mm. So it sounds almost like a re-liberation again.
Oh, yeah. You
Um,
could write a book on it. I'm sure you could write a book on it.
wow. That I remember someone's telling me once, if you're going to do something right in anything you do, make sure you make the ending great. Because at the end of the day, that is what people often remember from something they've seen. Like maybe they'll remember a bit of the beginning, maybe a few lines, quotes here, but the ending will often be the thing that
Yeah.
people leave with. I mean, if you have a look, oh, what was that Cruise film? I think that was his one. Um,
Cocktail, I think that's the only Tom Cruise film I've sat all the way through.
hmm, I forget.
I
Sorry.
think I may have sat through
Um,
Risky Business, but that was before we knew Tom Cruise was crazy. So I get a pass for that,
hmm.
I feel like.
Okay, perhaps that was the wrong
I,
example.
I will counter with the worst ending I've ever had in a movie, which is the very unsatisfying ending to Center Stage, where they try to re-center Jodie. who is not really the center of the narrative at that point.
Mm.
But when we talk about center stage, we can talk about that. But First Wives Club, when people think about it, they think about the movie poster with Diane Keaton, Goldie Hawn, and Bette Midler smoking a cigar on a
Mm.
pedestal, and they think about their rendition of "You Don't Own Me" at the end of the movie. That's what they
Again,
think about.
again, the subversion, like, women smoking cigars.
Wearing pantsuits, Diane Keaton's legs in this movie poster in these like 90s legs, pantyhose with the short skirt and the man's blazer. It's very much Judy Garland and Summer Stock, where it's taking a male thing and subverting it into female wear,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
really cool. And Goldie Hawn could wear anything, really. Um, and they just and Bette Midler is just fabulously eccentric and eye catching no matter where she goes because she's Bette Midler.
So it sounds like this movie is not just a great product of its time, a great love letter to this era of both women, New York, and filmmaking, but also um, it's a great example to show of how women were sort of like starting to embrace their identity and their own issues.
And
And
this is
we
less
can.
than a year before Buffy too, because Buffy starts in March of
Mm,
'97, and this came out in '96. So
mm. You see, I love finding out about that because when you consider, like, Buffy was then and Sabrina was here, and all of these things, a lot of them were running either succinctly or just started to run as something else was finishing and such. You could almost look back at all of these popular shows and films and see them as one long linear progression of themes and issues until we reach our current day.
yeah, well, it's one of those things where it was really gratifying, even if you didn't have full context and have lived your whole life, to really watch women owning who they were. I don't want to say that's what turned me gay, because it was David Boreanaz as Angel that really turned me gay. Shout out David Boreanaz. But watching how the women connected in different phases of their lives and even how they fought with each other because they did fight, like they were very honest, because you have that trope in movies sometimes where people are really unhappy and they don't talk about it, and
Mm,
like it's the reason you have a 3-hour movie. Like there are so many things they both say and don't say in the fight they have about who they are and about who they are in relation to each other. um
mm,
the opening scene, so there's a funeral in the movie, which is kind of the catalyst for getting them all back together, and they have this really great moment where they do a montage of their space as they're doing lunch as three women that have just lost their friend. And they start off with their masks on about their joy and their happiness and their status quo and how great it is and how satisfied they are. And then as they start drinking, and as lunch goes on, they just start going back not just into the old patterns they have at
mm,
as 20-year olds, where they were like in this kind of really young sisterhood because they were in a sorority together, but it's also about how they don't know how to be vulnerable with each other, and they
mm,
learn throughout the movie how to be vulnerable with each other, and they almost have to teach each other how to be vulnerable in a way. um, it's not just about Annie having self-esteem, it's about how Annie learns to stand up for herself, and it's about um, when Elise snipes at Brenda and makes a joke about how the only thing she's ever won is a pie eating contest, it gets her slapped because that hurts Brenda immensely. And Brenda doesn't say, "You hurt me." Brenda just literally slaps her. Um, and it's a really great moment where there's so many things said and unsaid, and it's very real. And that's part of why I struggled to call this movie camp. I think it's a cult classic. I think it's very hyper realistic. I think it is very pop and very 90s. Just look at the cell phones they use and the computer they have. Um, it's also, you can do a really great pop thing without going all the way to camp. And I don't think this would have served
mm,
the movie to have gone all the way into camp. I think you need the realism to offset the different spaces that are very lush and very upper class. Um, You do get a bit of campiness with Maggie Smith, but I think that's just because it's Maggie Smith. I don't think that's movie. I just think if Maggie Smith comes onto your set, that's what you're getting. And I don't mean that in a
Yes.
bad way. I think it works in Hook. I think it works here. I think it works especially in Downton Abbey. It worked really well in Tea for Dames. I don't know if you've seen Tea for
Yeah.
Dames or not, but it worked really well in Tea for Dames.
Mm,
And Maggie Smith has just been doing this for a long time. Maggie Smith, no, it was Judy Dench who made fun of herself in the staged thing was really cool. But yeah, I'm just
mm,
looking to see if I can figure out what Maggie Smith has been in that I've seen
mm,
besides it. But
mm. Just had a look at the clock, sir. We're running a bit over at the second, so maybe
okay,
we should
yeah.
look to bring this to a conclusion.
The conclusion is if you haven't seen First Wives Club, take some time. If you have seen First Wives Club, see it again and enjoy it and bring your friends and family. It's not Jumanji, but it's still very good.
What a great advertisement for it.
I
But
try.
this is the thing, anything that we discuss on here, um, it's usually something that's worthwhile people's time checking out. And it's great to be able to discuss the classics and give brief, hopefully breathe some new life into them again. And what I mean by that is send new people their way that might not have seen or heard about it. Um, and to be honest, it sounds like it's such a great movie, and I will certainly be looking to check it out at some point soon.
You're going to have the music stuck in your head long after you're done with the movie, but you're also going to have those quotes now. You're going to find yourself quoting the film. Do try to find the version with the correct music, because there is a scene in a ballroom where one of the versions of it they've dubbed over the swing big band music with like a pop song that did not age well. Um, so try to if you're watching a version and the music doesn't make sense, you're just watching a version with that one scene where it's a very bad music dub. But as long as that doesn't distract you, you'll be fine.
uh, right. Okay. I shall keep that in mind whilst I am trying to find a good version of it to watch.
Yes, I'd let you
Maybe
borrow
I'll
my
leave it.
DVD, but it would be hard to ship it to you in time. I feel like Brexit would put a gum in that works.
Uh, possibly, possibly. Right.
Before
No.
it goes, let's see if I can figure out where it's streaming. So it is streaming if you have Hulu Premium, if you have Stars, and it's on Amazon Prime, but it's probably not free.
Probably
Um,
not. But if it's something's worthwhile checking out, one can spend a bit of money for it.
I mean, you can find the DVD for not too much money. It's been out for a while, unless they release like an anniversary edition. Um, yeah, which would be neat. But anyway, so that was great, and I very much appreciate spending the time with you listening to me yammer on about this fabulous movie.
And I've enjoyed learning a bit more about it and also having a good think about how this movie encapsulates such great themes from that era. Um, it's always a pleasure to have a good in-depth discussion about stuff like that.
Yeah, it's great. And now I'm going to take my fabulous white heels and I'm going to go kicking down a New York City street at 3 in the morning where there is oddly nobody else around after having a victorious rendition of You Don't Own Me. So,
Ah, excellent, excellent.
all right. Thank
Right
everyone
then.
for listening in and we'll definitely talk to you next time. Check out our YouTube archive if you'd like. It's a great way to leave us comments. Everything is Gay Podcast. If you type that into the YouTube bar for searching, you'll find us very easily.
Mm.
And currently up there, we have our episodes of Sabrina, episodes of the X-Men and the Golden Girls. And then coming up will be what is ever after that that we have talked about, because all the stuff from our podcast goes into that after a month of being up in Anchor or wherever major podcasts are sold. Thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great evening. And remember, don't get mad, get every